Danger Dolan. So lately, I've seen a lot of articles on the net with doomsday titles like a new game industry crash is just around the corner, the Vita has no games, Wii U is failing, and Nintendo is thinking about moving out of the console market. So what is the deal here? Why is there such a slump in the industry? And of course, are we heading for another crash? So like last time, I'll be going through this in 5 different points if you have a look at the top of this video, with my major topics saved for last. So without further ado, let's move on to number 5. So back in the early 1980s, you had the original game crash. And that happened because at the time, Atari was pumping out so many games. The devs could literally create these games within weeks of each other. The most infamous of which would be E.T., where so many copies of the game were produced and they just didn't sell enough, and the people who did buy them weren't satisfied, that it just turned into this huge money sink and led to some major problems. So at the time, everyone was copying each other. There were no laws that said you couldn't just copy another guy's game and put it into yours. It was the Wild West at the time. There were no review systems or seal of qualities. It was just make a game, and if it looks similar to the other one, who cares? It'll make you money. So this led to stagnant game design because people were just literally ripping off each other's games. And furthermore, there were too many console clones. So you had like 12 or 14 consoles in contrast to today where you only have like 3 major ones. Of course, that doesn't mean they don't have competition. Nowadays, you have iPhone and Android games, you have Ouya games, you have the Steam boxes. There are many options you can go with. Of course, back then the American dollar value had dropped, so you're forced to pay a lot of money for subpar games. Whereas these days, it's kind of the opposite. The dollar value's gone up, but games are cheaper. It leads people to believe that game prices have gone up over the years, but in reality, they've gone down. It's just that people are making more money these days. So back in the Atari days, people stopped playing games because the quality had dropped. There was so much repetition between games. You could say that there's no risk of people not playing games anymore today because it's part of our culture. And that is true, there's a lot of diversity here. You got indie games, you got mobile games, and you got console games, you got PC games. There's no risk of the industry collapsing on itself. But because AAA titles these days are so high risk and high budget, they really can't deviate from the accepted format of most games, you know, like a hack and slash or a shooter. So it leads to an innovative stagnation. So the problems of back then still exist today, but there's not much of a threat of the industry getting crushed. So if publishers are so financially vested in a game, they don't want any risk, they just want the same stuff that the audience expects to see. And also back in the 1980s, you didn't have really internet. Internet wasn't, you know, ultra mainstream. It was difficult to find actual legitimate reviews for a game unless you actually bought it or you subscribed to a magazine like Nintendo Power and then trust their word on it. That problem does not exist today by any stretch, and it was solved back in the day by having something like the Nintendo Seal of Quality, in which they would make sure that the games going out didn't infringe on copyright and they were actually fun and they weren't just color rehashes of old games. Whereas nowadays, big review companies, none of them are paid off with quotations, but they do get butted for high scores. What I mean by that is, say they invite some IGN members out to a fancy barbecue, the publisher's treat of course. Then what they do is they sit you down and they make you play a really fun part of the game way before it's released. And in that case, the members from IGN are conditioned to think, wow, these guys are so nice and this game was so fun for the little time that I played it. Maybe the game is really fun, maybe I'm gonna like the whole product. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything fishy going on. But there is a little bit of coercing there. That's like if, say, you have a friend who introduces you to a game. Like my brother introduced me to Dota 2. Initially, I probably wouldn't have played it because I couldn't get into it. But after he played it with me for a little while, I thought, wow, this is actually a pretty good game. So I was kind of conditioned to like it, right? It's the same type of situation with reviewers. They don't have anything against the game. I mean, it is a dodgy practice, but it's not illegal or anything. There's nothing really wrong with it. So most people just turn to something like YouTube where you have honest reviewers who aren't getting paid by anybody or sponsored by anybody. They just say how they feel in front of a camera. Not to say that there isn't anything fishy going on in YouTube. The big companies do go behind the scenes and give them some paid reviews and that kind of thing. But for the most part, you usually find whoever reviewer you want to see and find out about a game before you buy it. So is history repeating itself? Little elements are, but so long as you have a lot of variety with different types of games like indie or PC or console. And as long as there are review systems so that the best titles actually get noticed and the crap titles just fall to the wayside, I don't really see a problem, and I hope it continues along that route. And so long as we have the internet, it will. So ever since free-to-play became a thing, companies are beginning very sneaky with how they shill you for quite a bit of money. Some companies offer a online pass. You buy a pass or a subscription and suddenly you have access to a whole plethora of features in game, or maybe even multiple games. For instance, Sony Online Entertainment recently created a subscription so that you could get PlanetSide 2 and EverQuest Next in one package. Now, back in the day in something like Super Smash Bros., if you worked hard enough in the game and you figured out how to unlock certain characters, that's all you had to do. You just had to invest some time and there was nothing else to it. Nowadays, companies realize that what they can do is put it onto a sort of store, whether it be cosmetic or something that completely breaks the game. If anyone here has played Diablo 3, you'll probably know what I'm talking about with the real money auction house. Now the in-game auction house is more or less fine. It's still a bit broken in that you can just buy a certain amount of gear that makes the actual game really easy. So if you're leveling up from say 40 to 50, traditionally, because that gear doesn't really last you a long time, the price on the auction house is quite cheap. So you go in there, you buy some leveling up gear for say $5 or $10. Suddenly your character can just mow down hordes of dudes and the effort is just gone. The difficulty is broken beyond belief, and that is how it is right now. There are options when you finish the game in order to have it very difficult, even if you buy that gear, but the fact is, while you're leveling up, which is a lengthy process in itself, you can basically just break the game. Now this wouldn't be so bad, but since it is like an online game and you're playing with other people, and modes where if you die once then you lose your character. I mean, single player games having cheat codes is fine, but when you enable that in multiplayer matches, it just ruins everybody's fun. And it's especially worse when you put a real life price tag on it. Now, something that's come up recently in the phone casual market is the concept of time games. Now, if you've played Bravely Default, you'll know what I'm talking about. Essentially there, you can build a town in the menu interface, and the longer you wait, let's say 8 hours, the town supplies you with say potions or armor, and from then on you can keep using it. So the longer you wait, the more conveniences you get in game. However, phone games take it one step further. You can either wait say 20 hours to get some really cool thing, or you can pay us $1 and get it instantly. Now so far it hasn't been that big of a deal, mainly because it's new, mainly because it's in the phone market where everything's really cheap anyway. But it could always balloon and start affecting AAA games, and suddenly you're either waiting for conveniences or you're actually paying to get it right now, and most of the time people are so impatient they'll just buy it instantly and just give the money and just buy it. So this is a new form of microtransaction, and it's not exactly the same as DLC. So the whole concept of DLC is sound. The developers work on an extra piece of content for your game and then release it on the side for minimum cost. Basically an expansion pack, but very small and very specific. However, some companies just cut out pieces of the game and then sell it to you later on. Or some of them cut out pieces of the game and leave it on the disc and then sell you that and expect you to pay to unlock it. And this goes in conjunction with paywalls. We have to pay in order to advance the game. Maybe the final piece of the plot is in that DLC. So then devs aren't even completing games. They're saying, okay, maybe we could just cut it off there, but we've done enough work, we'll just sell that and recoup some losses later on. So are DLC, microtransactions, paywalls, and time games causing a market crash? Well, if people get put off actually buying a game because they know that they've got to spend more money inside the game to unlock things, then yeah, it could actually hurt the industry. But right now, it's so infrequent that people really don't mind, and I don't mind either. It's only when someone goes on a subscription model and they actually add microtransactions to enhance the game that I get pissed off. Or they make it pay to win. That kind of stuff really sucks, man. This one I don't want to talk about for too long, but I really do feel like I should mention it. A lot of consoles in this new generation have been shoehorning in a lot of gimmicks that aren't needed, and even in the previous generation too. I'm talking specifically about, say, the Wii with the motion control, the Wii U with the tablet screen, the Xbox with Kinect, PlayStation with the Move. All of these things which aren't needed to enhance the gaming experience. They are there from a marketing perspective to say to someone, this console is different from this other console because it comes with, say, the screen. And a lot of the time, the console's prices have gone up because they need to package it together with this gimmick. And the reality is, your typical customer will not really have a look at how powerful the console is. They'll have a look at the price point, they'll have a look at the game library, and they'll say, is this worth it? And the console price is a huge influence on that decision. even to the point where people will go for a super small hard drive space so long as the actual console is a tiny bit cheaper. Even though they'll have to buy a new hard drive later on, they'll still do it. So when Nintendo put the Wii U with the tablet controller, which wasn't really needed, it was a very good convenience, and packaged separately from the console would have been fantastic, but it's not an integral part of the system. And yes, when people do not invest into a console, it does hurt the industry, because then people are not playing on that console, developers are not developing games for that console because they think, oh wow, there's no point doing it, because the return on our investment for actually developing it wouldn't be enough, because you haven't got enough people buying games for that system. This happens all the time, and it is a problem. So this is something that has been running rampant in the industry, and people do not know how to handle piracy. For a long time, companies would try and stop you from downloading, say, music or movies and games online. They would try to stop torrents, but then people would find a way around it. They'd try to sue Pirate Bay. Pirate Bay wouldn't shut down. So then it's like, well, what do we do next? And it is difficult to find out who came up with a solution first, but someone like Apple with their Apple Store made it really easy for you to buy music. And then people would realize, oh wow, well, instead of going to all this trouble trying to torrent movies and getting bad upload speeds, if we just pay a tiny bit onto this really nice website, we can just get all this music easily. So convenience became more of an incentive than paying for free. And it's the same thing with movies with something like Netflix. And now games with something like Steam. The trick is not to make sure people can't board your boat, but to make the boat so accessible that everyone will want to jump in, even if they have to pay a little ticket fee. Once everyone's in your boat, suddenly you can make more boats, and suddenly you have a fucking fleet. So some game companies still put in measures that stop you from pirating, but they do it intrusively. They always have always online features, just like something like SimCity. And even though people can get around it, all it does is piss off your loyal customers. By the same token though, piracy is very much hurting the industry. Back in the old days with, say, cartridges before, CDs, where you could just burn CDs easily, you would get basically 100% of your income from games sold because people didn't really have any other choice. However, nowadays, if you develop a game and you have a sales forecast, you got to figure out how much revenue you're going to get in order to be able to maintain your company. You have to take into account how much of a cut piracy will eat into your income. So with these big AAA titles, companies take a look at the figures and say, okay, so we're going to probably lose about a third of our sales to piracy. So maybe if we just dump all of our costs into marketing, if we make a deal with Steam, maybe we could, handle it. What I am glad to see, even though the PC piracy is just rampant and blatant, console piracy is very much dulled down because they're getting very good with their console security. Like these days, even though the 3DS has been out for quite a while, people really still don't know how to hack that thing. They kind of do, but then you can only have one game on an SD card, one save, and half the time it breaks your save game. It's just not worth it. Whereas if you actually buy the game, if you put some money into it, you are guaranteed to either have a cartridge or a download that is always there and you can always get again, and save games that are safe. So will piracy cause a market crash? Well, it won't cause a crash, but it's definitely an ongoing process to try to make online stores that are very accessible and easy to use. I mean, all of us, all over the world, including retailers, are making the transition to online sales. Physical media isn't going to go anywhere, but online media is definitely going to take over. Piracy will always be a problem, especially when you're dealing with, say, open software. The budget for AAA games, the graphical requirements, the escalation in all respects is getting out of control. Back in the PlayStation N64 days, you could make a game for less than $1 million and make quite a nice return from that. Now, hundreds of millions of dollars being sunk into giant games like MMOs to combat another huge game like WoW. You need dozens of teams, sometimes spread all over the world. Not only are they competing with the console market and Steam games, you've also got Android and iPhone games which only go for, say, $2. You have Steam sales which have giant games which are going for so little, like $30. So this reminds me of the time when I used to go to the local market down in Australia. They would have a lot of pirated DVDs, a lot of pirated games this was back in the PS2 days. What happened there? You'd go down you would buy a game for say $10. Everyone would be doing the same thing, all $10. You'd buy as many games as you want, and that's it. It was all illegal, and every time the cops would come around, they would obviously hide all their stuff, but it was happening. Eventually, say about a year later, the costs went down so far that people were struggling to make a return on their investments in actually burning these CDs, right? The price had gone from $10 to $5 per DVD. It barely covered the price you would just pay to get the spindle of all the DVDs. The reason for that is one store started selling them for $5 and everyone else was trying to keep up, right? So then everyone else was $5, then another store would open up for $3, everyone have to lower the price again, and thank Christ, eventually the police came and just shut it down completely and said, nobody, we're gonna have this place under surveillance, nobody is gonna be selling this shit anymore. But nowadays we have a split, a clear, concise split between big business, AAA games, and independent ones, which is more of a recent development, right? Now the big business AAAs, which always get a lot of marketing, which you'll all have heard about, which are the console launch titles. Most of those companies are run by suits and marketers, and those are the guys in charge of game design. So you have the actual developers, you have the creative minds, and they're just tasked with programming and art. So when you have business-minded guys who really don't know the industry that well, they just know how to sell a product. When they're in charge of game design, you get things like the WoW's Blizzard store, you get DLC. They decide what genre the game is. We want the COD audience. Sci-fi is doing quite well. Let's make a sci-fi game, even though we really don't have any creative vision behind it. So in mainstream gameplay, graphics and marketability, set pieces, they've taken over what is considered the hook for games. Games are promoted even when the art and the gameplay and the programming haven't lined up yet. In most games, it's only in the last 20% of the actual development that these things start coming together. But games start getting promoted even way before then, so they'd have to release little bits and pieces of a game. So then you have rapidly changing design. If you guys have ever seen, say, a pre-alpha game and then it's so utterly radically different by the time it releases, that's why. Development is so iterative, they never really know where it's gonna go, especially if you don't have a vision behind it. Now, independent titles represent everything good about the old days. They focus on fun gameplay and innovative things. However, they don't have the same marketing or development budgets that the big titles do. They rely purely on talent, how much money they have, and how much time they can invest. So on one hand, you have big titles that really don't have any vision or really thrilling, innovative gameplay behind it. And then you have indie titles which don't have the marketing budgets or even maybe the budget to actually finish the game. Not only that, but they don't look fancy, so the mainstream audience would be like, "Phew, that doesn't look that great." And whether or not you are AAA or indie, devs get burnt out during crunch time. If you have a look at the indie game The Movie, you can see the devs behind Super Meat Boy were working basically 24-hour days to get that thing onto the Xbox marketplace. The only reason you can do that is if you feel really passionate about getting this thing out. Or you're a dev in a AAA company and they're basically whipping you to do it. So now if you're going to program for, say, a bank or small trade businesses, or you want to develop things for those, that is securer than developing a game. It's better paying. And a lot of game universities will say don't get into game development because it's not that great for like a long-term career move. So then devs aren't exactly getting into the industry because they're getting warned not to. So that means there's huge budget games and there's not enough people to take care of it, not enough new talent, new fresh blood, and not enough veterans because the older people with families don't want to be in a business where they could lose their jobs at any moment or not make a return on their time and money investment. So is AAA budget escalation, marketers and producers in charge of development and game changing so often and the dev burnout from crunch time, is this causing a market crash? If there was anything that would, this would be it, of course. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The graphical escalation and the amount of resources required to be put into a AAA title that is the flagship for, say, a console, and the lack of mainstream awareness for indie titles. It's all leading towards something, but maybe we're just not clever enough to see where it is yet. It could be good, it could be bad, but that's all I'll say. That's it for this gaming discussion. Have a good one.